Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for this very important topic. We welcome you, and this is another collaboration from the U.S. Attorney Office, DC, and Healing Communities, USA. We are again so excited to have this opportunity to bring you this topic since October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So in that honor, we are here today to unpack to you, how does domestic violence affect children? I'm Dr. Denise Strothers, National Director of Training with Healing Communities. And our co-host today is Ms. Denise Adams. Denise, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Adams. I am the Community Outreach Specialist for the United States Attorney's Office. Thank you and welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Denise. We wanted to make sure that we had the right people with us today. It is important to both of these agencies that we are bringing awareness and training to the faith-based community, government agencies, and the community at large. We want to make sure that you guys have the right information and that you know what's going on where these kinds of social issues are concerned. And so I want to introduce our fine panel today. Our first presenter is going to be Reverend Maxine Ball, who is the founder of Isaac Ministries. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor providing mental health services to victims of crime in Prince George's County, Maryland. Directly after her, we will have Mr. Creighton, Assistant USA, Ryan Creighton, who is a senior prosecutor in the Sex Offense and Domestic Violence Office. Directly after him would be Dr. Saleh, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist with Children's National Hospital. He is the medical director of ambulatory psychiatry, and he's also with Tacoma Theater Outpatient Clinic. And then last but not least, we will have Ms. Tracy Owusu, who is a victim advocate, forensic interviewer with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And Ms. Tracy has over 16 years of experience working with child victims, witnesses, and vulnerable adults of abuse, trauma, and violence in the District of Columbia. After our panelists, then it will be your turn. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can place them in the chat. But if we have time, we will allow questions to be live, and our panelists will be very happy to answer your questions. During that presentation, because we are recording, we are asking that you remain muted until the time of Q&A. And let me see, I think Denise is trying to tell me something. Okay, so Assistant USA Attorney, he can go first. So are you ready, Mr. Creighton? You may begin.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone today. Just to give a little bit of background on myself and the work that I do, I've been at the U.S. Attorney's Office here for about 8 years now. Over those years, the vast majority of the work I've done has been in what we call our sex offense and domestic violence section. So I prosecuted misdemeanor domestic violence cases for a while, then went on to prosecute felony domestic violence cases, and then spent a couple of years doing sex offense work as well. In 2020, early 2020, our office created a special unit that is focused on preventing intimate partner violence. So you'll sometimes hear it called IPV. and I was the coordinator for that program. So I got to work on that for a while as well. And I'm currently the supervisor of our domestic violence misdemeanor unit. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is the temporary protection order and the civil protection order process in the District of Columbia. It's a really important tool that is available to victims and their families that is actually separate from criminal cases. So we often get a lot of questions, when we have criminal cases from victims where they want to know what they can do themselves to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. And a lot of times civil protection orders are at least a tool that can be really helpful in those situations. And what I tell people is, the criminal case is technically being brought by us, right, by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so decisions about, whether we're going to go to trial or what a plea should look like, those are going to be made by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Obviously, we always talk to victims and we want to take into account the way they feel about the case. But the real difference between that and a civil protection order is that the petitioner or the victim in that case is in complete control of that process. And so you can go over to Superior Court, and I'm actually going to put the link here in the chat in a few minutes here when I'm done talking. And you will end up getting in front of a judge that same day in most cases. And you can explain to the judge what's going on, what your concerns are, if there's some sort of abuse that's happening. And the judge can issue what's then called a temporary protection order that same day. Now, that order has to be served on what's called the respondent, the person that you're trying to get protection from. But police are able to assist with that. And people within what's called the Domestic Violence Intake Center over at the courthouse can also assist with that. So the reason I want to talk about these today is that they're just such a really important tool for people to be able to use. They can now last for up to 2 years. And once you get that initial temporary protection order, there will then be another hearing, usually a couple of weeks after that, where the person that you're trying to get the protection order from will also be present. And the judge will then basically set what the rules are going to be. So sometimes it's that there will not be any contact unless it is directly relating to picking up children from daycare or school or something like that. So you're going to get in front of a judge and you can very specifically lay out what you think the problems are and what you think the solutions will be. One question that people often have is, what about children, right? How do they factor into all of this? And that's obviously what this event is about today. And that's a really important part of the protection order process. The judge will want to know whether or not there are children who are involved and whether those children are safe or if they need to be part of this protection order. And they can be added to it, even to the earlier, what's called the temporary protection order before that full hearing. The judge can order that the respondent not have contact with the children, not even stay away from their school or daycare. And so it really creates these additional tools that the judge can then implement in the regular civil protection order. I can see a question has popped up whether or not this process is unique to the District of Columbia. Not really. Most jurisdictions have some version of this. So, for example, in Maryland, they're called temporary restraining orders. Each jurisdiction has a slightly different way of handling this. Because I practice here in the District of Columbia, I'm far more familiar with the way we do things here in DC. But I do know that pretty much every jurisdiction in the country has some version of these. And actually, that does bring up a good point, which is that I'm pretty sure everywhere, all 50 states in the District of Columbia will reciprocally they recognize these from other jurisdictions. So if someone has a protection order from Maryland, for example, and then they happen to be here in DC and the person violates that protection order here in DC, we can actually prosecute that here in DC. And I guess that's actually kind of the final part of information about protective orders is that, sometimes people say it's just a piece of paper, right? What's the point? Why am I even getting this? And the really big thing about protection orders is that violating one of those, whether it's a temporary protection order or the full civil protection order that lasts up to 2 years, Violating that is itself a crime, okay? So what I always tell people is what this piece of paper means is you don't have to wait for something to happen. If the person that you get this order against just shows up at your house or shows up at your kid's school, that right there is a crime, right? And if you call police and tell them about this protection order, or also they will be able to look it up as well in their internal databases, then they can make an arrest on the spot right there. And so that's the real power of these orders, is we no longer have to wait for something to happen. And so the second someone shows up in violation of one of these orders, you can call police then. You don't have to wait for the situation to escalate. You don't have to wait for, some sort of threat or anything like that. You can just call right away. So that's why they're so important. I am, as I said, going to make sure to put this right into the chat here. What I'm pasting in here is, this is the website that Superior Court, which is our local court here in the District of Columbia, has set up. And it kind of explains what the different options are and how you can start the process of getting a protection order. There are also a lot of organizations within the District of Columbia here that can assist with getting protection orders. Organizations like DC Safe, which is probably the group that we work with the most over here at the U.S. Attorney's Office. That you can always go onto their website as well, and they have a lot of really helpful information about this as well. So that's actually the major thing that I kind of wanted to talk about today. I'm, of course, more than happy to talk about what we do here at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I really think that the civil protection order process, and in particular, the way that it can be expanded to cover family members and children and daycares and schools and things like that, is a really important tool that, frankly, we often direct people to, even if there's a criminal case involved, because I want people to have their own control over the situation and to get in front of a judge and explain that and know that that order is going to last possibly even longer than the criminal case will. And so they will be protected no matter what happens, whether there's a guilty verdict or if a case gets dismissed or who knows what else might happen. So if anyone has any questions about that process or anything else here at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I'm happy to talk about that. But otherwise, those were the major points I wanted to make sure to get across today.
Okay, great. Hopefully, Attorney Ryan, you can stick around to the end so that you can take some questions. I know that I have quite a few that I would like to ask. And so if you can stick around or at least come back towards the end, that would be great. Next, we're going to have Reverend Maxine Ball. And she, as I said, is the founder of Isaac Ministries. So she too is working with victims and families every day. So Reverend Maxine, it's on you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Strothers, for allowing me this opportunity to talk about a subject that's a passion in my heart that I've dedicated my life to. I am the founder of Isaac Ministries. Sarah's house, as you see behind me, is the mental health piece of Isaac Ministries. And we are a 23-year-old nonprofit organization. And while I have been working predominantly with victims in the Maryland area since I've been licensed as a national counselor, as well as a licensed clinical professional counselor, I've worked with families and church faith communities of all multicultural, internationally as well, helping families and advocating for children and families that have experienced domestic violence. So I'll get right into my presentation. First slide. Thank you. Healing Hearts, Having Hope is actually a curriculum that was developed back in 2005, and it was created through an actual grant from the with the Domestic Violence Coalition of Maryland. And I always like to give memory to Reverend Wesley Wovenhorse, who partnered with Isaac Ministries and others to develop this curriculum to actually train the faith community. This was back in, as I said, in 2005. And we're just so thankful that as we have gone throughout the entire state of Maryland in every county, when Reverend Wovenhorse was alive, we thank We thank everyone and all of the organizations that helped us to spread that education about what parishioners and congregations need to know and how to handle it when they identify it. So what I like to do is to talk about Bronfenbrenner's ecological system theory. And that's how I approach domestic violence and victims of crime, as well as children who have been hurt by domestic violence. My presentation is going to talk more about the actual child as the victim, however. And we do understand and know that women and men, it has no respect of person when you're talking about domestic violence. But I want to specifically talk about children and talk about the set of relationships that exist between any complex system and their environment or surroundings. And so today, as we are talking about children, we're talking about the relationship that children and their families will have to go through. And I think it's Ryan talked about this morning, we looked at the judicial system, and part of that is one of the systems that victim of crime or domestic violence and child sexual assault or abuse occurs. So when you look at this model, the micro system, you see the child in the middle and his immediate environment, which is basically his household, his family, his siblings, and his parents. When you get to the meso system, those things that child connect to, he mentioned the school earlier, daycare, and also their friends and their peers. The exosystem indirect environment is like medical, law enforcement, police, social services often get involved, especially when it's a child that is involved. The macro system, when we talk about the social and cultural values, we're talking about now the higher level of the economic system, the education system, the judicial system, those who make the legislative laws. And then the chrono system is those changes over time. So things that are happening, we just came out of a pandemic, and it's been a big impact on domestic violence, of victims being stuck in their homes with their abusers, as well as children. So when we talk about domestic violence in children, we're talking about over 3.3 million children. And domestic violence, as I said, have no respect of person. And while we also recognize that males can also be impacted, that predominantly women or family caretakers by family members, if the children are exposed to that, it is a predictor that they also are experiencing abuse. And it's 1,500 times more likely that children will be abused if a partner that's within the home is being abused. These are statistics from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So what I would like to do is to give you a case. It's a case study, actually, of a child, a 12-year-old. And as you can see, they experience some symptoms as they go through domestic violence. And depending upon the age group, they may be more severe or less severe, depending upon the actual circumstances surrounding the abuse. But some of the things that you can look out for, especially for parents who, if the child is being abused and you don't know about it. So they may have sleep disturbances, sleep paralysis, nightmares. Their eating can be impacted, flashback, their thinking and their memory, their hypervigilance, and also their even suicide attempts and suicide ideations. Recently had a case where a 9-year-old committed suicide. So it looks like suicide is no respect of person as well. It does not respect age, and our children, especially our younger children, it seems they're being impacted more and more. So as I said, a 12-year-old female, I'm going to give you a case scenario of, I treated her, and I have been treating her since November 2021. And I would say within the last 6 months that she's finally broken her silence to even talk about the abuse that she suffered. So when we talk about this female, 12 years old, she's shy, quiet, depressed, low self-esteem. She was mad, but she also experienced a lot of shame. And that was the reason of her not breaking her silence earlier on in treatment. She was distracted. It was variable in terms of her attention span as to how long she could stay engaged or even interested. She was acting out at home, sometimes withdrawn, mostly in counseling. She was kind of withdrawn in the beginning, but she was aggressive at home. She resisted authority, and at times, even in counseling, she could be hostile. Her thought process I observed as being avoidant and suppression, but also distracted. Her content, she had intrusive thoughts. She was preoccupied, and she would be triggered by the name of her abuser. So those are the ways that abuse can manifest emotionally, behaviorally, and cognitively. So the question can ask, why don't children tell? Why didn't this young lady tell? Why didn't this child tell? And that's because the thought that no one would believe them, and sometimes that's what perpetrators will say, no one's going to believe you, or who are they going to believe, you or me? Or they threaten them, I will hurt you. So children threaten, worried about whether or not they're going to get in trouble. Sometimes social services removes them from the home, rightly so, but children are afraid of that. Children may have tried to tell an adult. They're not believed, or they don't get the help that they need. So they give up and they stop trying. They just become silent. Child may also have dissociated the actual abuse. What that means is they shut down, they black out. And so if they're blacking out during this time, they don't remember it when they come back to themselves. And so those are the things that when you wonder why they haven't told or they can't tell, those are the reasons. And they don't want to be retaliated against, especially if the abuser still lives in the home. And please keep me straight on my time. Okay, so for teens, for domestic violence in teens, this is also from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. 1 out of 5 teenage girls report having been physically or sexually abused by a dating partner. And on an average, 28% of high school and college students experience dating violence at some point. Our colleges have exploded with sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence on the campuses. And so we want to be aware that not only in the home, domestic violence, intimate partner is out in the street. There's a Ghanaian proverb that said, the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people, and the people spill out into the street, into our societies. So how does domestic violence impact teens? I'll give you another case scenario. A 17-year-old was raped in her own home. When she came to counseling, she said she did smoke marijuana to help her with her anxiety and to calm her down and to keep her kind of sane. I had to have her make the promise that as long as she was in counseling, she could not use marijuana. I needed her to be with her full faculties as much as possible and not under the influence of a drug. But as you can see, the higher incidences of drug and alcohol are their coping strategies at times. She was also suicidal, and I had to put her on suicide watch and work with her for a straight 5 days, calling her every day, having a suicide contract of her promising not to harm herself. And she had low self-esteem at times. I guess overall, she had low self-esteem, but other times she presented very out of control, very mad, very agitated, hostile. Her mother and her father, they never married, so she lived with a family member. She felt worthless. She didn't have a voice when it came to them. She watched her brother die, and when she was very young, and she felt that she could have saved her brother by doing CPR, but her family wouldn't allow her. So she was carrying that on top of the trauma of the rape. She was experiencing sleep disturbances. She was emotionally detached, depressed, and anxious. Her behavior, she was very argumentative, disrespectful to adults in the household. She challenged their authority and any authority figure. She pretty much was okay with me. She was irritable, easily agitated. But when it came to her thinking and her age, she was 17 years old, but she had more the mentality of a younger child. She acted very silly at times, laughing and playing. She didn't fully grasp the depth of different situations as we talked about them. But that may have been her way of coping through them as well, of laughing it off, of playing it off, because of the pain being so great. She had difficulty communicating, and she also, she had poor memory. She would have racing thoughts at times. And also she had difficulty focusing a lot of time. So those are some of the symptoms and how the actual violence or abuse will manifest in the teen. So this is to any parents, and even if you're not a parent, you're here for your business, you may be a parent, so every single parent, to be watchful of your children, not only your younger children, but also especially your teens, because this is a blowout now. Well, we have teen girls are being sexually abused, having possessive and jealous partners. And this isn't for the older teens as well. These are for the younger teens as well. As early as 11, 12, 13, the tweens, as they call them, you have this bossy partners blaming or hurting them, putting them down, trivializing them, and really scaring them, scare tactics. I also say, watch what they come home with. If your children or teens are coming home with things that you are not buying, then it's coming from somewhere. And if it's coming from somewhere, to please be watchful of their behavior, that they are not being abused. So what can you do to address this with your teens and your children? We know that at the teen age, children are kind of rebellious to their parents anyway, because they feel parents don't understand, and parents, they're just smarter than the parents. And so what we want to make sure is that if you are talking to your children, first of all, about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, about sexual abuse, stalking, strangulation, all of those things that are happening in our world today, if you can't talk about these things to your teen, talk to them about talking to another adult that they trust. Their pastors, their youth ministers, any of the members within the congregation. That's one of the reasons why we developed this training for faith communities, so they can identify it, and they can also have people that are available within their churches and their parishioners if the congregation are experiencing it in their homes. Also, to offer educational programs during the faith community events and other events within your neighborhoods, in your communities, inviting them out, having them, even if they're available, to participate in some of the webinars and things that like this, that they can come and ask questions and they can interact with the professionals, particularly with our law and our legislative branches, understanding how those protection orders can really, in some cases, save their lives. So even though they may say, yeah, it's just a piece of paper, I always say it's better to have it than not. And then last, sharing community resources with them, getting them involved, give them things to do, and also that they can give back. They have many experiences that we probably don't even know about that they can share. And that's one of the main sources of information that I try now, is to stay engaged with them to find out what's happening and what's going on. So that completes my presentation. I thank you for your time, for your listening. I hope that in some way has been helpful for you. I will still be on the call if there are questions that you have. Dr. Denise also has my information. I do have 2 books that are available that she has the information on as well. One on domestic violence. I am a conqueror of domestic violence. And so I have some real time experience and experiences that I share in my book. It's called I'm Mad as Hell, but it was really, I was mad at hell. And so that was the first book. And the second book is Scars. Scars is about a love relationship with the Creator, our God, and answers the question, why do bad things happen to good people? So I thank you again, Dr. Strothers, and for all of you for listening.
All right. Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Come here, baby girl.
sorry, baby girl. All right, next we have Dr. Saleh. Again, he is a child psychiatrist with the Children's National Hospital. So it's on you, Dr. Saleh.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate that. And thanks for all these participants. Actually, my last name is Saleh. So,
Saleh. Okay,
Saleh.
Thank you.
So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I work at the Children's National Hospital. I'm the medical director for the outpatient clinic and the local Tacoma Theater clinic in Washington, D.C. So we're going to talk about domestic violence in children. I just put this definition of domestic violence, which is a willful intimidation, emotional abuse, threats, physical assaults, sexual assaults, or other abusive behaviors from one partner to another to control and gain control of the other person. This is from the National Coalition for Domestic Violence. So, I just put the adult data about the domestic violence, which is close to 5 million women in the United States exposed to domestic violence every year. This is mean like in lifelong, 1 every 4 women exposed to domestic violence. And we actually did good job. I mean, as you see in this graph, the number in the left are the incidence of domestic violence per 1,000 women. And we actually did a good job like in decreasing the numbers. However, since 2013, there's a consistent increase. And since 2019, there was sharp increase, which could be because of COVID, pandemic, and being at home most of the time. Same situation in Washington, D.C. You can see in this graph in the left, this is the number of, this is talking about the statistic of homicide. And this number also talking about the murders incidents. And this is the homicide incidence in Washington, D.C. You can see in 2008, there was only 8 cases. And 2021, there was 20 cases. And this can talk about the number of other domestic violence. In Washington, D.C., there is 1 woman every 3 and 4 every 4 men experienced some form of domestic violence in their life. So I put the list of domestic violence risk factors in the families. This is not for children. Because I have another list for children. And this is put under 4 categories: individual, relationship, community, and social. And I appreciate Dr. Ball's graph about the ecological system, which is actually a better description of this. Shows like what the other factors can increase the domestic violence exposure to children. So in the individual, I highlighted the low self-esteem and mental health issues, because this can cause, this could be the mental health issue for an adult person could be result as well as a risk factor for increased domestic violence. Other individual factors could be low education, young age, drug use, poor problem-solving skills, history of domestic violence, other medical problems in the relationship could be a tense and conflict relationship, to partner dominance and economic problems, and hereditary domestic violence. We could be like exposed from grandparents to individual to children and young children. And in the community, there's a poverty, unemployment, high rates of violence, access to drugs and firearms, and social situations. So inequalities for gender, and the communities that maybe support aggressive behaviors and income inequality. And we can talk about what can domestic violence do to mental health of adults. Can be all of the above. Depression can increase 3 times because of domestic violence. Just to give you a number, like around 18% of adults will have depression in their lifelong. And imagine this increased 3 times, maybe could be about 60% risk increase of depression. Postpartum aggression by 10%, of course, PTSD, increase 4%, anxiety disorder, even psychosis and schizophrenia can increase. Also substance use, eating disorders, and suicide attempts. This is the list for what could be risk factor that cause children to be exposed to domestic violence. We look at as a system, as a family, of course, like a dysfunction in the family relationship is a major problem. Also divorced parents, physical problems for the child themselves, mental problem for the child, mixed ethnicity, of course, emotional problem for the mother, low socioeconomic status, and other children in the family. All this factor could be cause increased domestic violence exposure. So what goes beside the physical risk of the exposure to domestic violence, because if they are exposed, witnessing, they could be exposed themselves, so they can have physical injuries. But we're talking about the mental health results of domestic violence, and that can start as early as infants. Like this study shows that pregnant women who are exposed to domestic violence, their children, they follow them up until they are go to school age, and they found they have higher symptoms of trauma, of PTSD symptoms. For example, being more irritable, more anxious, easily started, more crying, aggressive behaviors. These kids, compared to the other children, will have more risk of these symptoms. You can also imagine the impact on the emotional, the children, according to their age. Like if they are a toddler, will have different results compared if they are a middle school or high school. The main thing is the children will have problems in trust, which is like one of the primary things, the milestones, emotional milestones that children should achieve as a toddler. And as an infant, they should believe that the world is a safe place to be in. But if they are exposed to domestic violence, they will understand it is actually not a safe thing. And even my mother cannot protect me. So these kids with domestic violence, preschool children will have increase of externalizing and internalizing behaviors. Externalizing behaviors will mean that they have more crying, more destroying things, more hyperactive, hitting other kids, maybe hurting themselves. An internalizing problem, they stop talking, being more isolated, withdrawal behaviors, crying incidents with no reason, and being more depressed. So entirely for all children who witness domestic violence, they have triple risk of increase of conduct disorders. And conduct disorders like very violent behaviors that can hurt themselves, hurt others, hurt animals and the environments. For example, you can see kids torturing animals or hitting other kids or bullying them. They even can have increase in stealing or maybe abusing other children, like maybe rape for others. Things like this can increase more for the kids who are exposed to domestic violence. 40% of children will have PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, low self-esteem. Let's talk about them a little bit. PTSD as post-traumatic stress disorders, like the symptoms of PTSD in the three main domains. First of all, like avoidance behaviors, like they avoid talking to adults, avoid going to meeting with family activities or being in social activities. That will remind them of the trauma. Being easily started, crying, depressive symptoms, and like having even increased suicide thoughts and attempt. Similarly for depression, being sad, and enjoying their lives, and anxiety and low self-esteem, which could be actually causing them to have more problems with their peers. Also, like, we can think about how they will have more poor school achievements. If they have poor school achievements, they will have low socioeconomic situation in the future, more risky behaviors in the future. So we can think about it can have a major effect on lifelong. So this is the direct impact that we talk about the children from being exposed to domestic violence, but also there is indirect impact that being exposed to being with adults who have mental health problem because of domestic violence. So they can copying the adults because the adults have drug use. They can be exposed to more drug use or violence behaviors. They can be exposed to insufficient care, being neglected, and this can result in more of mental health problems for children. So I put this here because I want to look at the domestic violence as a part of the system. This is a very nice study which discuss the items of vulnerability that may increase kids to be exposed to traumatic incidents. And if you see here, like in the left 1 to 3 is like the categories under 3 major domains. The first is the parental psychopathology, family relationship, and family environment problems. And you can see they are the similar risk factors that we talked about initially, that adults could be exposed to trauma, to domestic violence. And if you see, like, even if there is no risk factors, there's like about 12% risk of exposure to trauma. But as much of the risk factor increase, you can see the sharp increase in the number. Like if there are eight factors, that will increase the risk exposure to trauma to 60%. And these 8 factors could be domestic violence, like poverty, neighborhood violence, and this can happen all together. And if you look at the children, they probably exposed to other traumatic incidents than the domestic violence. This is important to think about the system. So when kids exposed to stress, including domestic violence, they will have physiological response to stress. And that could be neurological dysregulation to something called sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight system we have. Endocrinological systems, like the stress hormones will increase. And this include cortisol, we call hypophysis pituitary adrenal axis will have more increase of stress hormones. Immune system dysfunction will happen, cardiovascular problems may happen, and genetic problems even can happen because of this. And this is important if you're talking about why increases stress hormones, because chronic increase of stress hormones are toxic to our brain cells. So, and if you see in this shape, this is the number, this is the development of a brain in a child. When a child, when they were born, they have about 100 billion brain cells or neurons. And these neurons will connect to other neurons to communicate and talk to each other. As a baby, as an infant, each neuron have about 2,500 connection. As they grow up, it goes up to 15,000 connection. And increasing the stress will actually impact this connection between neurons and will result in more problems. One of the things is, if you look at the prefrontal cortex, which is the area in the brain that regulates our emotions, our thinking, it is the last to develop at up to age 22. And that increased exposure to stress will mostly impact this prefrontal cortex and may result in lifelong changes in the brain, like decrease in the size of the brain, like some emotional dysfunction that is very difficult to treat. So this is very important to understand what is biology, the biological impact that can happen because of the trauma. So what is the treatment for domestic violence? Of course, the number 1 is to stop domestic violence. Number 2 is because we have to stop stress to treat the stress. Number 2 is ensure safety. This is because could be threatening by others, or could be even internalizing emotional problems can cause suicide ideation behaviors. Of course, like social support, religious support could be very, very important here. And then we have to make medical workup to be sure that there is no injuries because of this, or there's no infections because of the domestic violence. And then psychiatrical treatment, psychiatry or psychological treatment, depends on the child's situation. We have developed a specific therapy, psychotherapy, that target this trauma. The most common is cognitive behavior therapy. Could be individual or could be trauma-focused CBT. That can actually very important to make build relationship with a trusted caregiver to be able to give support to the child. Other therapy options could be cognitive behavior interventions for trauma in school, which is a group therapy, could be a family therapy intervention, and finally medications could be used. So medication is very important if there's significant mood symptoms, anxiety symptoms that is not responsive to treatment, to therapy, including suicidal ideation. And these are some resources we have at the Children's Hospital. We have the Child and Adolescent Protection Center, and this is the link for them and the phone numbers. Of course, we have the psychiatry department, psychology department, and the phone numbers here. We mainly locate at the Tacoma Theater Clinic, and the Child Adolescent Protection Center is in the main hospital in DC downtown. And this is my resources. I mean, if you have any question, please ask me. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you guys see the voice recording at the bottom there? You have to tell me how you did that. I really like that. That was excellent. So what an awesome presentation. And we're going to bring it. If we go over time, that's okay. I do see that there are a couple of questions in the chat. And before we take those questions, we're going to have Tracy Owusu to come, and she's going to give us some additional resource information.
Thank you, Dr. Strothers. Thank you, everyone. So as you've heard from Dr. Saleh and Reverend Ball about these alarming statistics, we know that a lot of times children are often considered the hidden victims in families where domestic violence occurs. So children who witness domestic violence or are victims of abuse themselves are at serious risk for long-term physical and mental health problems. And we know this from the stats that we heard. It's very staggering. Witnessing domestic violence can mean actually seeing the incidents of physical and or sexual abuse, hearing threats or fighting noises, observing the aftermath of what occurred, and being aware of tension between individuals. So domestic violence poses a serious threat to children's emotional, psychological, and physical well-being, especially if the violence is chronic. Because of these alarming statistics and how domestic violence is a public health issue, the U.S. Attorney's Office does have a specialized unit specific to assisting victims and witnesses, especially our most vulnerable population, which are our children. The mission of the Victim Witness Assistance Unit is to empower victims and witnesses of crimes and to serve their needs with compassion and understanding through the coordinated, consistent, and effective work of qualified professionals and their corroborative partners. Victims and witnesses of crimes need information, services, and support when taking part in the justice process. So the Victim Witness Unit informs victims of their rights under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which is the CVRA, and information about the criminal justice process. We also accompany victims and witnesses to court. We do safety planning and witness security assessments through our witness security team, and we assist victims with the Crime Victims Compensation Program, which is a program that helps victims and witnesses receive financial compensation through DC Superior Court. We make referrals to community, medical, legal resources, and counseling and therapy. So our witness security team addresses safety concerns made by the victim or witness and family. And it's very important to address those concerns because a lot of people do not feel comfortable coming forward if they don't know if they're in danger, if they don't know what could happen next. And so we can enhance security measures for individuals who choose to stay at home, whether replacing doors or windows, security cameras in the home. We can also provide emergency temporary lodging. And so that's where it would be at a hotel or a shelter. And we can provide moving assistance as well. So for people who would like to move from where they're staying or even move out of state. We have a central services team, and they handle victim notification system. And so throughout the whole process, victims are made aware of what's taking place in court, when hearings are taking place, and we also handle travel and lodging for victims and witnesses from out of town. We also make sure that we have advocates. And so within our advocate program, we do have forensic interviewers, which is something that I do. A forensic interview of a child is a recorded interview that's designed to elicit information from a child where there are concerns of possible abuse or when the child has witnessed violence against another person. The interview is done in a non-leading manner. It's in a safe and child-friendly environment. And those who conduct forensic interviews have mastered the art of connecting with children and talking with them in a supportive manner that encourages children to share information while minimizing the trauma to the child. And so I conduct forensic interviews, and I talk to a lot of child victims and witnesses. And we do hear a lot of times how the adults didn't even realize that the child knew what was going on. So it's really important that the children have a voice and that they're able to communicate what they saw and what they heard or what they felt throughout their traumatic experience. We have specialized child advocates that work with children, and they help from the court process, the beginning to the end, whether it's the investigation through sentencing. We have a kids court program that takes place monthly within our building, and it's to help prepare children who are expected to testify in court. We teach children about everyone's roles in the courtroom and explain the child's role as a witness and how their job is just to tell the truth, and that, letting them know who the judge is, who the prosecutor is, what a court marshal does, and what a court reporter does. We want to make sure that we talk to the children about their feelings and concerns when it comes to testifying. And we go over the rules of the courtroom. And the most important rule is just to tell the truth. Every witness needs some preparation prior to testifying, but we know that a child who knows what to expect and is prepared for his or her role will provide more credible testimony. Child victims and witnesses require extra time and special effort to prepare for court. If there is a sentencing where there is a plea or the person is found guilty, every child has the right to make a victim impact statement to the court. And so we do assist with that. They can talk about how the crime has impacted them physically, emotionally, financially, and psychologically. And they can also recommend a sentence to the court just based off of how they felt it impacted them. We know that reporting to the police can be life-saving for a person who's going through domestic violence and for future prevention. And so it's just really important that we let children know just to tell us the truth, let them know that they are believed. We must listen to children's concerns and validate their feelings. We have to let children know that the violence isn't their fault, and we're here to get them some help. No one deserves to be abused, and the violence that does happen, it can be the leading cause of death by homicide for women in the United States. So violence can erupt into life-threatening or lethal proportions. Children need love and support more than ever, and studies show that a key factor in how well child victims heal emotionally after abuse is the level of understanding and support that they receive from parents, from caretakers, from the clergy, from any adults in their lives that's there to support them. So I will put a list of resources in the chat. It is some other mental health resources, of course, through Children's Hospital that Dr. Saleh mentioned, but there are some other ones. So in case you want to hang on to those and just have that in your Rolodex, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we do have some questions.
Thanks so much. This is a very, very good question. So it is very surprising to see that the resilience in children is very, very good. Like, as I said, like, if you look at my slide, like I said, 40% of the kids may have PTSD, depression, but there's also 60% haven't been having this symptoms, which is, if you look at them, which is very important. Like, we think about why these kids are, what's the difference between them. And the study shows that the most important factor is having a safe relationship with a caregiver or a parent. Like, if there's one parent is have domestic violence, if the other parent shows connection with the child and be supportive, that is the most important factor to not develop ED symptoms. I mean, you can look at this as in a major, like, even like children who are exposed to wars and things like other traumas. If they have a good family support and social support, they will thrive. And similar situation with domestic violence. That's why the very important to empower the parents who trusted parents, and very important to have social support for that parent. Take care of the child.
All right. Great.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions?
As I was listening to all the presentations, I was reminded of a number of years ago when my sons were growing up. I was a baseball coach. I was a Little League baseball coach in Trenton, New Jersey's inner city. And one of the challenges that we faced was the fact that in a number of cases, the mothers would be bringing their children, and the boys would have adverse behavior, anger, and all this. And when you made an investigation, found out that there were that the children had been victims of domestic violence. The mother, in some cases, had filed restraining orders. And this is in a rough inner city community. When you talk about environmental factors, you're talking about gangs. So, I was just reflecting on all of that as the discussions were going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question for Ryan. How would you handle a situation where the parent says, I'm not ready to leave my abuser, but I still want to be able to keep my children safe?
Sure, that's a really good question, and is unfortunately something that we deal with a lot. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, our options in terms of pursuing criminal cases are often sometimes limited. I will say we have a just absolutely fantastic group of victim witness advocates here Tracy Owusu is one of them. And we can often assign them to cases to help work with victims and, identify resources that might be available in the community, regardless of what's happening with the criminal case. And so that's often something that we do when someone feels like they're stuck in that situation. The other thing that we can often do is, getting back to what I was speaking about earlier, is refer them to the CPO process, because they may not be looking to put someone, a family member or a loved one in jail, right? And so by getting a CPO, and maybe then we would agree to dismiss a criminal case, they then have kind of control over that. The other thing that we have available to us in our criminal cases is we have various options for what we call diversion. And diversion programs are ways that we can move a case through our system without necessarily having it result in, certainly jail time, but often even a conviction. So it might be something like a defendant agrees to get classes or do drug or alcohol treatment, whatever the victim, who often knows him better than anyone, knows the defendant better than anyone, whatever they identify as being the things that we need to fix. Anger management is another common one. We can have the person agree to do all of those things. And if they successfully complete whatever those programs are or other options, then we will agree to dismiss our criminal case. And so that way it doesn't result in a conviction at all. The person's record remains clean, but hopefully they've gotten the help or the services that they needed in order to improve the situation. So we will often have that conversation with the victim when they ask us questions like that.
Okay, that's great. Awesome. And how effective are the restraining orders? Of course, we've seen on TV and movies where they're never effective, but in real life, how effective are the restraining orders?
It's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't think I will have a satisfactory answer for you. We do prosecute a decent number of violations of protective orders. And when we do, we typically see that they stop violating. But, we only see the cases when there's a problem, right? We don't see the times when someone goes and gets a protection order and the person says, okay, I'm going to leave you alone and comply with this order, and then everything goes well, right? Those cases don't make their way to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I don't really know what the effective answer is there. I'm sure that it has been studied, just by, it's a little bit outside of my expertise.
Okay. All right. Okay. We have two hands raised. Reverend Maxine, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just had a clarification question. I think the gentleman, Mr. Atchison,
yes.
Was that a question you were, or just a statement that you were making?
It was just a comment. It was just a comment. It was just, it caused me to reflect on certain experiences. I'm a retired pastor. I used to work, done a lot of work with youth. I also worked in the criminal justice system as a prison chaplain. And so, all of those things sort of came together. And as I was listening to the various presentations, and in particular, I thought about the kids that I served as a baseball coach and the challenges that we faced working with them and their parents.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. All right. When you were making your statement, it just brought to mind. Many of you may have heard of the ACEs, Adverse Child Experiences Questionnaire. Mm-hmm. That's one of the questionnaires that I use often, mostly all the time in all of my cases as victims come in. And one of the things that I assess, because there is so much trauma, most of them are coming in with post-traumatic stress disorder. So that ACEs questionnaire actually will ask questions of persons as to experiences that they've had prior to the year of 18 years of age. And most of the time, the higher number of experiences that they've had prior to turning 18 is a predictor that they would be involved in crime. And so when you have those high numbers of things of asking questions like, were they in a household growing up with domestic violence, whether they experienced it or someone in the family experienced it, someone went to jail, All of those things are being touched inappropriately. And so you're right. This is another incident of how domestic violence hurt children, because when it starts in the home at early age and as they continue to grow, it just spills out in the street. If they never get help, if they never get their situations resolved, they will just grow up and it will be a continuing cycle. That's why I guess we look at it as a cycle of violence. And that's one of the things that I advocate for, is trying to eradicate it from the world so that it does stop. So the more advocates and the more work that we do, that hope that, bit by bit, every little bit helps and it can't hurt, that everyone is educated about it and then get involved. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, Dr. Saleh.
Yeah. My question is about the financial support for the families, because we get some cases like this. For example, a parent exposed to domestic violence, and then she wants to divorce from her husband, or there's a custody battle about the child, but they don't have the financial ability to hire a lawyer. It's a very long process. And as a result, the situation continues as it is. So do they have any resources about that?
I wasn't sure if Ryan was going to talk, but through DC Superior Court, there is a DC Legal Aid Society, and a lot of times they will assist people with just that. Of course, a lot of people do not have the finances when being a victim of crime. So we do also refer to the Crime Victims Compensation Program. And as long as they have a, report for being a victim of crime, they'll do an intake process, and that program can assist with certain things. So definitely DC Legal Aid Society will help, though, regarding the divorce and the lawyer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Community advocates for family and youth. They handle most of the cases in Maryland and from the courts in Prince George's County. But I know we have some overlap into other counties and also into DC. And they do have resources as well for when it comes to persons who cannot afford counseling. I also do that through my nonprofit. I work with Kathy as a contractor for counseling. And so my nonprofit, Sarah's House, is also, we do pro bono counseling as well. But when it comes to the financial and just resources, you can have them reach out to Kathy. So I'm putting this in the chat.
Okay, great. Miss Avon Hart Johnson, can you just go ahead and ask your question for Reverend Ball?
Sure. Yeah. Dr. Bell was talking about, or Ball was speaking about ACEs and about how the risk factors associated with ACEs might lead children down the pathway of, becoming, involved in the criminal legal system. And I just wanted to add my voice indicating that while that can be true, that, as Dr. Saleh indicated, it's important for us to focus on those protective factors, because even though, ACEs, the abuse, the violence, the community violence, the long periods of neglect, frequent transitions, and all that make up that, that risk profile of ACEs, I think it's really important for us to give our kids, that kind of benefit of the doubt. And Mr. Atkinson, indicated, his background in the criminal justice system. That's my background. And so, what we do is focus on the health and the well-being of the family systems, as well as children of incarcerated parents. I just spoke at length about this today. So forgive me for, kind of chiming in. But I think that it's important for us to continue to keep pounding away at those protective factors. And I also am looking forward to the information that she put in the chat in terms of pro bono resources, because I have a client that I would love to refer to Dr. Ball. Thank you.
All right, great. And also, we talked about ACEs in our last presentation, but could you or Dr. Ball just give us a brief understanding of what that is for those of us who have never heard of it before?
I'm not sure if you were speaking to me or Dr. Ball.
Yes, I was. Either one of you. Yes.
Well, the other experts here certainly can explain it and elaborate, but ACEs are potentially traumatic events that take place in a child's life before they reach the age of 18 years of age. Such circumstances have already been mentioned: violence or conflict within the home, abandonment, neglect, frequent changes of caregivers. And I'm not just talking about a change of babysitters. I'm talking about frequent changes of caregivers where a child does not know where that sense of stability and safety is coming from, which we all know that children thrive when they have a sense of stability and safety and routine in that protective adult to let them know that they are there for them. So ACEs, is centered around things like the household challenges, abuse, sexual abuse, or verbal abuse. I'm sure that the forensic psychologists or the one that does forensic interviewing, she's very much aware and sensitive to that. And the nature of trauma and how it shows up and can be perpetuated if not addressed. So what we do as advocates, and we keep pounding this away, is that we do have the ability and the responsibility as helping professionals to make sure that we help educate the parents, help other helping professionals, advocates and everyone else, to really understand we have that power to do so. We have the power to make change. We've got to make sure that we have educational seminars like this and education for the parents, but in a non-judgmental way so that the parent doesn't intrinsically feel as though they somehow failed, at raising their children. And so words have power and, and education is quite powerful. So thank you guys for letting me chime in. Thank you.
Right. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I also just chime in? Thank you, Dr. Hart. And also, I'm not a doctor. I need to correct that. But thank you for the opportunity to chime in about the ACEs. While I do use the ACEs it's kind of like a guidepost to kind of understand a person coming in, and it gives a focus for where the counseling needs to go, as well as what the child has experienced or the adult has experienced. And that way you can build that preventive treatment plan and the goals for that person to build resilience and rebuild their self-esteem, or build it if they've never had it. And so while it is, I think it's a good identification of risk factors of experience, but definitely there was one client that I had, she had the 0 score of ACEs, 0, nothing that happened in her household, but she was violently attacked. So definitely it's all in how, that ACEs is used, and people do have that understanding that, and even in the ACEs questionnaire, it says it's not a guarantee. It's not anything, but it gives you kind of a guidepost of something that the client has experienced, and you can move forward with as much information that you have to help that client heal and be restored.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing, informative, and I want to thank you guys so much for sticking around for an extra 20 minutes, but we just wanted to make sure that all of the information that is needed, I'm sure we have not even scratched the surface where this issue is concerned, but you have been armed with some good information that you can take back to your community organizations or to your churches. So on behalf of the U.S. Attorney Office and Healing Communities, we thank you so much for joining us, and look out for us again. We try to do these presentations once a month. So again, thank you guys. Have a blessed week, and we'll see you again soon.